This is a Southern Sin breaking news special. Be sure to like and subscribe now.
Every trial has two stories, the one the jury hears and the one they don't. Every trial has evidence that never made it into the courtroom, and deals are cut behind closed doors. This isn't court TV, so let's get that right out of the way. This isn't the polished version of law that you see everywhere else. This is Southern Sin. It's the platform where attorneys, investigators, analysts, and medical experts, well, they pull back that curtain and they ask the questions that keeps prosecutors up at night. Is there reasonable doubt? I'm Dara Kennedy. I'm your host, and this is Reasonable Doubt, Southern Sin, what the jury didn't hear. It's where we break the news and we break down the biggest trials, the street level truths, and the facts that never made the record. Court is in session right here tonight, guys, and it's a story that we are all following. We want you to tune in on @Southern Sin, and we have got everyone here that you need to hear about. Tonight, we're breaking down the Rob Reiner double murder case. This, of course, is the one that's all in the news. It is Rob Reiner and his wife were killed by, yes, his son.
Every trial has a story the jury never hears, where the truth lives outside the courtroom. Join our host, Dara Kennedy, and the sharpest legal minds in the business for a new riveting show. Reasonable Doubt, what the jury doesn't hear. No grandstanding, no spin, just the arguments that could change everything. Tonight, one question dominates the Rob Reiner murder case. With a diagnosis of schizophrenia, will Nick Reiner plead not guilty by insanity or be ruled unfit to stand trial at all? This isn't speculation. It's strategy. It's Reasonable Doubt. What the jury won't hear, you will. Tonight at 9 p.m. on YouTube at Southern Sin.
It's a psychological, legal minefield. And to break it all down tonight, we've brought in the sharpest minds in the room. Please, you have seen them before, somewhere on all of the platforms. Joining us tonight is the attorney, Gerald Griggs, known for cutting through courtroom theater to expose the real truth. Hello, Gerald. Welcome in again. We know how he works under the law. We're also joined by Josh Schiffer. Hi, Josh. He's here to challenge the narrative and analyze the strategy and ask the uncomfortable questions that many of us won't. We're going to do that here tonight. And anchoring the medical reality of the case is our resident expert, Dr. Frida, who I call the 4-time quadruple board certified doctor. She's going to walk us through all of it, especially that bloody Emmy report. But she'll also walk us through Nick's mental health history to let us know what really was his mind state. So questions for the guests. Let's just start. Gerald, should we start with you? Because I know you've been here before with many of those high profile cases that you've worked on.
Sure.
Let's just ask the question that everyone wants to know. Is this going to trial or not?
I think that's the $1,000,000 question. I think that they're already setting it up for a competency issue. So I think you're going to have a competency evaluation prior to any trial, and that may determine whether or not this sees the light of day in a courtroom.
Okay, so then let's, as he speaks, let's Dr. Frida, can you give us what a breakdown is of schizophrenia?
Yes. Schizophrenia is a very serious brain disorder. It is a mental health condition, and it involves patients having hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thought, disorganized speech. They can have auditory hallucinations, meaning they hear voices that aren't really there, or they can have visual ones where they see things that aren't there. They can also have delusions, meaning they firmly believe that something is true when it's not. They often can have paranoid delusions where they think someone's out to get them, and then they might hear voices telling them to harm that person. And so it's very difficult to treat, and it requires lifelong treatment. And many patients end up having substance abuse, being homeless, very difficult to treat serious mental disorder.
You know what, Dr. Franz, let's go to you really quick. Give us your first impression of what this case is. It's not even a case yet. This entire situation of Nick killing his parents.
So, first of all, awesome to be here. I wish I was Josh Schiffer. That said, I would suspect this is going to be a slow play. I think we're going to have to delve into competency. Does he understand what's going on? Is he mentally stable enough to assist his counsel? After we get through that slow play, then it's going to be a question of whether or not the DA out there is pursuing the death penalty. And let me say this, California is kind of a death penalty state. They got the death penalty, but they don't really use it. And it's been a hot minute since they put someone to death. So even if it is a capital case, I think in the back of everyone's mind, it's not really going to be a capital case, especially with some of the mental health co-occurring disorders that seem to be present.
Attorney Franz, my bad. That's what I meant to call you. But let me ask you this. Why would it even be possible for this to be a death penalty case? Do you think a jury would be open to that, considering that he has mental health issues, he killed his parents? Wouldn't the defense, and Attorney Gerald, you jump in on this too maybe, wouldn't the defense be like he was out of his mind, so he didn't know what he was doing? How can you give him the death penalty?
I think you've got all the right ingredients for this not to be a death penalty, including the fact that the victims are the same family members of the accused. So generally, when you have that scenario, it's a double tragedy, right? Can't bring back Rob Reiner, and his son is being prosecuted for his murder. So I don't think realistically this is a capital case, but good attorneys got to treat it like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Attorney Franz. I think the biggest issue you're going to face if they try to prosecute this as a capital case is the victim and the victim's politics when it came to capital cases. Rob Reiner was an outspoken proponent of not using the death penalty. So to use the death penalty against his son for the murder of him and his wife, you're going to have that issue over and over again. So I don't think it would be smart for the district attorney to pursue the death penalty. And I agree as well. This is going to move slowly because if his lawyers move to have him evaluated for competency to show whether he understands what's happening, understands the role of the judge, understands the role of the jury, understands what's happening to him, they're going to have medical experts on both sides. Of course, he's got to be evaluated by the state's doctors. And then if they don't get the decision that they're looking for, they being the defense, then they're going to hire their own experts. And there may very well be a trial on whether or not he's competent to even stand trial.
I'll tell you one thing that concerns me when we talk about schizophrenics and we hear rumors of him, perhaps his lawyer pleading not guilty by reason of mental defect. It really frustrates me as a physician because I don't want the stigma of schizophrenia to get out of control. Already people are saying, oh, he's schizophrenic, that's why he's violent. Oh, he's schizophrenic. But here's the truth of the matter. We have many patients who are living with schizophrenia, yet most are not violent. In fact, schizophrenic patients are more likely to be assaulted than to be the assaulters. And so it really becomes quite a challenge to figure out what is his accountability. And then what happens with all of the people who are schizophrenic, but then also perhaps have some bad ideas, even if they know right from wrong. Would this set a precedent for people with schizophrenia thinking, hey, I'll definitely get away with murder, even if I take away the lives of my parents, because now we're stigmatized and everyone thinks that we're out of control. And so there's going to be a fine line. And I really hope that due diligence is done where people go back in his history and decipher what was him being out of control, paranoid, aggressive due to schizophrenia, and how much was it him being a privileged person who perhaps made some bad decisions.
Doc, can you do us a favor and talk a little bit about, I use the phrase co-occurring disorders. Explain what that means and how that's a little bit distinctly different than just schizophrenic.
So if he has co-occurring disorders, then he could have the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And I know that Dr. Drew, I believe, was saying something to the point of most males being diagnosed with schizophrenia, it's going to occur in the late teens. And that's true. Most men are diagnosed with schizophrenia between the late teens and early 20s. However, women are often diagnosed late 20s to early 30s, and some women later in life. So even if someone falls outside of that norm of when they're diagnosed, it doesn't mean that it's an impossibility to be diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 32. I want to mention that. But then in addition to having schizophrenia, you could also have substance use disorder. In fact, that's quite common for patients with schizophrenia. Number one, not to recognize that they have the disorder, even if diagnosed. Number two, they often self-medicate. You can only imagine if you're hearing voices that aren't there, or things, you're being told to do things that you know that you shouldn't do, then you might turn to medications such as cocaine, such as methamphetamines, such as PCP. And so then you develop a substance use disorder, which can have many of the same symptoms as schizophrenia itself. Case in point, something like a methamphetamine or even PCP can give you paranoia, can give you delusions, can give you anxiety, can increase your risk for acting out violently, depending on where you are in a psychotic state. And so it's certainly not black and white.
And I want to jump in here and touch a little bit on that. And I think people fully need to understand that when we're talking about whether or not somebody is competent, we're not really going into whether or not those actions gave rise to the criminal behavior. We're trying to determine whether or not they have the mental status to understand what's happening to them. Okay. But I like the fact that, Dr. Frida, you're pointing out that anytime we have these highly publicized cases and we start talking about the legal terms and the medical terms, there's the possible stigma that goes along with this. We know that NIck Reiner struggled very deeply with his mental health. We also know he struggled with substance abuse. So ultimately, I think what his lawyers are going to do initially is get to the bottom of whether or not he fully understands why he's even in this situation, the role of the judge, the role of his lawyers, the role of the jury, and where he is. And then once we get there, and it's determined by his experts and the government's experts that he understands why he's there, then we will break down mentally whether he has the mens rea or the mental intent to have committed the act. So I think that's where we're making this designation, so people could keep throwing out this, or whether he's insane, or whether those are legal terms that we have to define through evidence and through multiple hearings, potentially multiple trials, maybe a competency trial, and then a guilt innocence phase trial, and then ultimately a sanity trial. But I think we're intertwining these terms, and I like the way you put it to the audience, that we don't want to stigmatize individuals who may have a mental health diagnosis with what may or may not have been a criminal act.
Yeah. The other question I have is, did he know right from wrong? And I'm assuming that's stepping into the legal terms. So, you mentioned, does he know why he's there, starting there? And then, I'd really be curious to see when they go back and break things down and figure out, did he know right from wrong? If he didn't know right from wrong and he took the lives of his parents, I guess, are we still saying allegedly? Or I'm not sure, but I'll just say allegedly he took the lives of his parents. If he didn't know right from wrong, I would suspect that he wouldn't be trying to hide it or cover up things in the hotel room. I would suspect if he were so out of control and out of his mind at the time, or being so disorganized and being disconnected from reality, then he would not try to cover it up. But I imagine that will come up in the legal proceedings.
If I can ask a question to the attorneys, if you were his attorney right now, NIck Reiner's attorney, let's just be Alan Jackson, right? His attorney. What conversations is he actually having? And is Nick in a position to actually rationalize and understand the conversations that Alan Jackson is trying to have with him? What's happening right now?
So if I can't be Josh Schiffer, I'll be Alan Jackson for a minute. Here's the thing. It's the big, does he understand what's going on? If he doesn't understand what's going on, there are no conversations. It's like, hey, do you understand that you're set for arraignment? And he's looking at the sky saying the sky is purple. There's no conversations. If he is able to understand the distinction between right and wrong, it's probably a lot of listening. There's probably a private investigator that's getting the fact-finding piece. But if I'm Alan Jackson, I'm listening to see if there's all these indications of, does this guy really understand? Can he help me? And look, guys, here's the big piece. We saw an arraignment, which is the most simple part of the entire proceeding. You plead not guilty, right? We saw an arraignment continued. That is a giant blinking neon light of there may be something going on behind the scenes that is not allowing him to assist his counsel.
And I think we have to look at how he appeared at his arraignment. When you are in a suicide jacket and you are not able to effectively communicate what is going on with you, that should show you where his defense counsel is. So the very first conversation you're going to have with him when you go out to the jail is, hi, my name is Attorney Gerald Griggs. Do you know why you're here? And if your client starts saying things about purple elephants or some other thing, then you have a real problem. And so now you go into just the basics. Do you know who I am? Do you know who the judge is? Do you know who the prosecutor is? Do you even know the reason why you're here? Do you know who possibly retained me? And so I think you're going to have all of those questions for him before you even get into, do you remember what happened? Is there the issue that may have set this off? All those important questions that you're sitting there with your private investigator trying to get an understanding of what happened there. So I think that's what his defense counsel did the first day. And I agree again. And, it's interesting in the show, I'm agreeing way too much with the other attorney, but I agree with him that, if you show up to an arraignment and an arraignment gets reset, that's the most simple criminal hearing ever. You just guilty or not guilty. You say not guilty, you request more time to get more evidence, and you may file a motion for bond. So that's pretty simple. But the fact that he couldn't get through an arraignment shows where we are, and it shows where his defense counsel is probably going with requesting a competency evaluation. And under California law, that can be asked by either the judge, by the defense attorney, or by the prosecutor. And clearly in this case, it's either going to be sua sponte from the judge or from defense counsel.
Well, Attorney Franz, let me ask you this. If the prosecution's theory depends on intent, how do you legally prove or dismantle intent when severe mental illness is literally the essential part of this case? This was supposed to be a loving family, right? So where does the burden actually fall in this case when the mental health, the schizophrenia, all of the illness is really in dispute when it really shouldn't be? That's what can be a little confusing.
So specific intent, wanted to do it, thought about doing it, did it. That is an oversimplified version of what specific intent is. And if he's not able to formulate specific intent, he's not able to be convicted of capital murder, of lesser murders. The issue is you got to look to the whole 360 view of what happened, not just the act itself. What did he do in advance of the act? If the act involved a weapon, was it a crime of passion scenario, or did he go to Walmart and buy the knife? What did he do afterwards? What things manifested themselves such that he either could not understand what he was doing, could not understand the distinction between right and wrong, or he did understand right and wrong. He knew that he did something. He wanted to do it. And then afterwards, he kind of covered his tracks about it. So if you're the prosecution, you got to show, if you believe he is in fact able to formulate the distinction between right and wrong, you've got to show, look, he got the knife. He did this. He did this. Things that show, and it's a high bar, guys, the inability to distinguish between right and wrong. We're not talking like has a mental health issue, but kind of understood what he was doing. It is the inability to distinguish between right and wrong, almost to the point where he didn't know what he was doing.
His team choose incompetency to stand trial versus insanity defense. And then what's the risk involved in that?
I missed the first part of the question. What'd you say?
Yeah, so at what point does the defense team choose incompetency to stand trial versus an insanity defense? And
So
then risks come with each. What's the difference?
so competency is the initial bar. You have to be able to show that the defendant understands why they're there, the role of the court, and what's happening in the criminal proceeding. And so again, you would request a competency evaluation initially to even get to the point whether or not he understands. Now, if he's ruled to be competent to stand trial, now it shifts into whether or not they're not guilty by reason of mental defect or an insanity defense. And again, like he said, that's a high bar. And in California, there are two different procedures. So there's the guilt innocence stage, and then there's the whether or not the person is insane or not stage. Now, if you lose the guilt innocence phase, and then it moves into the insanity phase, you could be punished the same. So it's a risky endeavor. You have to hire psychiatrists and psychologists to make sure you put on the requisite psychiatric evidence, making sure you get his medical record in. So I think that at this point, you focus on whether or not he's competent while you build your case and your defense. Because if he's not competent, he can't help you formulate your defense anyway. So you're kind of stuck. So I think that's the catch-22 in all of this. But if you go down that road of an NGRI, you make sure that you have your experts prepared. You make sure that you understand that you are trying to show that he does not have the requisite mental ability to form the intent and thus is not guilty.
So then, France, Nick, here it is. Nick has a long history of this mental illness, right? And I guess Dr. Fried, I think I heard you even say you're diagnosed early in your teen years with schizophrenia. But what is actually happening now is dating way back to his high school days. France, how much weight should a jury give to the alleged past behaviors? Because apparently, he's been in and out of 18 different rehab facilities. He's been fighting this illness, mental illness, whatever it is, for decades. So how does the jury then weigh that information when it's presented to them?
So if this goes to trial, it all comes in because it all goes towards the foundation of the mental health issue. So you've got to bring in the fact that this is a guy that has gone to treatment over 15 times. It obviously didn't work. You got to bring in all the demons he was fighting, all the mental health issues. You get to bring in the erratic behavior that happened at the party before the incident at, Conan O'Brien's party, where everybody's like, hey, this guy's acting kind of funny. It all comes in. It comes in during the trial. And if he's convicted, it comes in during the penalty phase.
And then, so Gerald, where does the character evidence cross the line into unfair prejudice?
Well, see, I think that's where it's different than most cases, because in most of the cases, you don't want the character evidence in. You don't want your client acting erratically at the party beforehand. You don't want 15 years of people coming in and saying, hey, this guy was very strange. He was disturbing. It was things happening. You don't want that in. But in this type of case, you do want it in because it negates his ability to form the requisite intent. Now, I think there are there are 4 key points that we have to raise when you're raising this defense in California. You're actually focused on his mental state at the time of the offense, which is why the days before and right after is important to get that snapshot, which is why that evidence comes in. Secondly, mental illness alone is not enough. It has to be focused on whether or not at the time of the offense, he was able to form the requisite mental intent. And fourth, California has abolished the menace capacity. So it either has to be he didn't have the requisite intent at the time and he was not guilty by reason of insanity, or that he was fully competent, knew what was happening, knew the difference between right and wrong, and would be held accountable for that. And of course, when we talk about the drug abuse, California, like every other state, voluntary intoxication is not a defense. So you want to focus simply on the effects of the mental illness that caused his inability to have the requisite mental state at the time of the offense.
So then should we talk motive? Let's try to talk motive at this point, right? And we've all seen it in the press. Everyone is sympathetic to obviously the victims, the parents, Rob and Michelle, right? I mean, that's just, any juror is gonna have their heartstrings tugged by that. Rightfully so, but who's to say that Nick doesn't right now, as he's over at Twin Towers or wherever it is in LA where he's supposedly being held, who's to say that he won't go tell his attorney, Alan Jackson, hey, it was self-defense. My dad came after me after we had a fight at Conan O'Brien's house. I feared for my life. My mom tried to jump in and I just had to self-defend myself. What if he tells his attorney that? Then it becomes an entirely different case. Is that not true, Attorney France?
So again, presupposing we don't have the not guilty by reason of insanity, which is again going to nullify motive, because if you can't form specific intent, you can't really formulate motive either. He can tell Alan Jackson whatever he wants to. The sad reality is, so far we've not heard any witnesses that were there. So the narrative gets to go towards him at this point. Now, that said, if I'm playing law enforcement, if I'm playing prosecutor, can I imagine a motive for someone to kill their affluent parents that has a drug problem? Money. Hey, we're sending you to treatment again. I don't want to go to treatment again. A fight ensues. There's any number of possible motives that can have emerged themselves. The problem is the state has the burden beyond a reasonable doubt to show and prove that burden beyond a speculative degree. So right now, who knows? If he has mental health issues, he may not believe he even did it. So there is that other component. So motive falls into the category of, yeah, they need it if they're going to prosecute him. But man, oh man, if he's not guilty by reason of insanity and he can't form specific intent, he certainly can't form motive.
I'll tell you something that's interesting to me in keeping with the lines of stigma and privilege. I think about all of the patients we know of, patients who have low income, patients who don't have access to being in mental health care facilities that cost $70,000 per month. One, they probably would have, issues of being in and out of jail or being homeless. And certainly it wouldn't be, a huge case if you had someone who was just, the average Joe, living in government housing, and they, took the lives of their parents. They would be in the jail. We would never hear about it. For him, I just sit and I question privilege, because for someone who has schizophrenia, if they really are, just out of control and aggressive and violent, I would expect them to have at least one mark on their criminal record. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was reported that he had no criminal record before this. And so that takes me back to, are we, throwing on the stigma because he's someone with mental health disorder, schizophrenia, and will it be his privilege and his fine lawyers that potentially allow him to profit from his crime if found not guilty?
I have a question, if I can, before we go to like the hotel room and was it legal or illegal and everything. Dr. Frida, for you, when you see him wrapped up in that robe or that sheet or whatever he has, and he goes and you see the video of him just kind of sauntering around, from a doctor's perspective, what are you thinking about knowing what we know now, that he was actually the man that just severely murdered his parents?
I'm thinking that he could truly have a diagnosis of schizophrenia where he is, disorganized. He's separated from reality. That's certainly a very strong possibility. Knowing his drug history, I'm thinking, could he have been on methamphetamine? Could he have been on cocaine? Could he have been on PCP? Also substances that can cause you to be aggressive, have paranoia, be psychotic. And then lastly, I'm thinking, did he just have a guilt after doing something that he knew was wrong? Because having mental illness does not mean you don't know the difference between right and wrong. In dealing with patients who have schizophrenia, who have bipolar disorder, schizoaffective, they still are people, they're not just defined by their illnesses. They can know right from wrong. And so in seeing him, all of those things are kind of floating around in my mind. But the main thing is that of all of the schizophrenic patients I've met, I've never met one who took the lives of their parents.
So is that normal then to just go into a bodega or the corner store and get some chips and everything? I mean, We don't know. Help educate us,
Yeah.
because everybody out there wants to know. Like, how is that possible to do a double homicide like that of your parents and then just go get some chips?
Well, nothing about this is normal, of course, but this all leads to, if you're on a substance, and certainly, again, your reality, you're not going to be based in reality, so you could do something like that. Or if you're someone who has been privileged and you've never had to be accountable for an issue ever in your life, you've had temper tantrums over the years, you've cursed your parents, you've been violent towards your parents, even, never to this point, and you've never really had accountability in your life, then perhaps that is the life you lead. You do things and you're not accountable. So then you go grab some chips. I don't know.
Okay, so now let's go back to I'm not laughing at the situation. It just seems so bizarre because he was just so calm. Let's go back to the law. And the basic question is to both attorneys, going over to the hotel room, was it legal for the police to go in and check his room and do that search just because a hotel employee said they found some bloody sheets?
Oh.
And so I think that's where the rubber's going to meet the road. I think that's where his attorney's going to make his hay, because once he's able to get into a robust motions practice and start getting evidence suppressed, namely what they found in the hotel room, because there was no exigent circumstance that necessitated them to go around the warrant requirement to get a search warrant to go into the room. They knew what had already happened. They knew who the suspect was. They could go to a magistrate court, or I guess that's what they're called in California and Georgia. They call it magistrate court, and get the warrant. It would have taken no time whatsoever. They could have cordoned off the hotel room to not let anybody get in, and then go in and do the search. So I think that's where he's going to make his hay. A motions practice that shows the state that their case is not as strong as they want it to be because the police made errors. And we all remember, and people are already saying that this may be the next OJ. That is the reason why, that case ended up the way it did, because the police made so many mistakes, and Johnny Cochran was able to make hay over those mistakes.
So the defense attorney in me is going to say all day long and twice on Sunday, get the stupid warrant. Why aren't you getting the warrant? We saw this in Luigi. They didn't get a warrant and they went through a bag. That's the stuff of motions to suppress. Now, the prosecutor in me is going to say, you can't say that there wasn't exigent circumstances. There were some exigent circumstances. I'm also going to argue, if I'm a prosecutor, the diminished expectation of privacy if it is a hotel. That a lot of places, I'm not saying it's going to work. If I have to argue it, I would say a lot of places, you don't have an expectation of privacy in an inn or in a hotel. So that said, certainly going to be a robust argument that stuff doesn't come in, if it even gets that far.
Yeah, but how aggressively should a defense challenge the no warrant search? And by the way, let's just put it out there. LAPD should know this top to bottom. This is what they do out there. So how aggressively should one challenge that?
So Alan Jackson's no dummy. Alan Jackson knows that the very family that's hiring him and paying him is the very family that's mourning the loss of their loved ones. Are you going to continuously drag them to court? Are you going to make them go through all these hearings if there's a safe route to a resolution that maybe you can live with, and more to the point, maybe your client can live with? So it's a delicate dance. Yes, he has an obligation to zealously represent his client, but sometimes when you set the world on fire, you can set yourself on fire, and more importantly, your client on fire in the process of doing it.
And here's something else we need to talk about. He's being retained and paid by somebody other than his client. So he put himself in a pickle. So I do agree with what he's saying, but I also understand that if your client actually does have the capacity to assist you in your defense, you're going to have to weigh those two options, because again, if the family doesn't want to go through prolonged litigation, but the client does, you put yourself in a real pickle. And so, I think that, yes, he should be as zealous as possible. That's the route to go down, robust motions practice to take away many of the elements that the state has, so you can get to a point where maybe you can get a resolution that's beneficial to your client, because now the state realizes they don't have a slam dunk. So, I mean, I think that that's one thing that's going to be weighing in Allen's head over and over again as he prepares this case.
Well, I don't know. Have we seen the arrest yet? Should we put up the arrest footage? There's plenty of surveillance footage surrounding Nick's actual whereabouts before and after the crime. And if the hotel did find the blood in his room, how did he leave the home and go unnoticed with all that blood wrapped around it? I mean, we've all been to LA. It's a lot going on out there, but people aren't just dripping in that amount of blood, right? So how does he go unnoticed? Did he shower at home and then go to the bodega, go to the store, or did he shower at the hotel room? And that's where, how does, Gerald, this is, you defend people like this. How much of this was planned and how much of it was, oops, I just realized I need to go and clean this up?
And see, I think that goes to whichever direction your defense is going to be. If you're arguing that he's clearly not mentally capable of understanding or appreciating right from wrong, that falls right into your argument. Who commits a murder and then goes out and dripping in blood all over the place? Somebody who does not recognize what they have just done. But now,
I don't know, reasonable doubt. There's reasonable doubt in there.
And that's my point. That's my point. And the reasonable doubt cuts to the defense. It doesn't cut to the prosecution. So I just think that ultimately it's a decision that he and his lawyer are going to have to make if he's able to make that decision. Which direction are we really going in? Because it's going to chart the course on how you address some of these facts that are beyond changing. And, my law school professor always said there are facts that you can't change. So you got to embrace them. So you got to figure out how you're going to embrace them.
Dara, can we take a look at the arrest? Can we watch that video?
Yeah, let's cue that arrest video.
32-year-old Nick Reiner walking across the Arco gas station in Exposition Park Sunday evening, wearing a green and black jacket, jeans, a black hat, and carrying a red backpack. Reiner then enters the AM/PM store, walks through the aisles, and then heads to the refrigerator to grab a drink. The store owner confirming it was a Gatorade. Reiner then waits in line to pay and exits, spending only about 2 minutes inside. You then see Reiner casually walk down Exposition Boulevard, crossing Vermont Avenue, and then turns left on Vermont, crossing the metro tracks. Reiner is then seen standing on the sidewalk along Exposition, right in front of a USC student housing building. In this next shot, you see the police drive by, and then 10 seconds later, turn around. Within seconds, he's surrounded by multiple police cars. Reiner raises his hands and surrenders. Next, you see multiple officers approach Reiner and arrest him.
Dr. Frida, please explain in just good old street terms to everybody who does not understand what we just saw. What is the mental state we just saw of that gentleman right there?
Well, he looked like someone who was pretty calm, cool, collected. He wasn't so, out of control where his id was taking over, where he just grabbed a drink and started drinking and walked out of the store. He seemed like someone who was pretty measured. But if indeed this occurred after he was the one who took the lives of his parents, then it's a totally different story. It's just very difficult. And I'll tell you what I'm struggling with. A lot of patients I deal with who have, mental diagnoses, bipolar, schizophrenia, many are also highly intelligent. And many have seen some of the same movies I'm seeing. So just not like now we're talking about what it would take to have, a proper defense or to show that you didn't know right from wrong. A piece of me, especially the cynical piece of me that understands that Nick Reiner was actually the screenwriter for that movie Being Charlie, where he wrote a movie about a privileged boy who was in and out of mental health facilities, who had substance abuse. He wrote that screenplay. And I don't know if anyone here has seen it or if you're familiar with it, but there are points in it reportedly where they touch on the child wanting to hurt his parents. And so a piece of me is a bit cynical. And I wonder, gosh, could he have been sophisticated enough? Could he have been sophisticated enough to be planning to look like he was out of control? I don't know if that was a reach. The only thing I know that I'm holding on to is that there are many schizophrenics. Most don't take the lives of their parents. And if you're schizophrenic, you're more likely to be assaulted than to be the assaulter. And so something in this entire story and even in his history, it's just not matching up. And I would just hate for him not to be held accountable for something that is really criminal.
Families that deal with this mental illness, they're in a constant fight. They're in a constant fight to keep their families together. They're in a constant fight to protect the person that has the mental illness. How do you counsel a family and have them continue to support someone like a Nick, right? Keeping him close to the vest, but still allowing him to try to go get the help that he needs? Because the question many are asking is, why was he even out of a mental facility? Why was he still living in the family home? When doctors supposedly said when they changed the medication, Dr. Fri, to speak to this, when they changed his medication 3 to 4 weeks prior to the murders, that's when this new cocktail of medicines kicked him to supposedly go and commit these acts, because apparently he had been acting erratically.
That's a major question. If you're paying $70,000 a month for a mental health care facility, and if what has been reported is true, that the medication changes were not working, and it was documented that he was still out of control on the medications, then he should have been still in a mental health facility. And so there are different questions. Was it the choice of the parents, Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner, to keep him at home against their better judgment, or against the mental health care, psychiatrist's better judgment? But really, when counseling parents of children, and we know how strong the love is of a mother to a child, of a father to a child. And just as we've heard, Rob Reiner dragged his son along places where the son wasn't invited. And it was because of the love for Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner, they tolerated Nick. The thing that has to be told to parents who have children who have issues: boundaries. No matter how much you love your child, if they are showing you that they are crossing over boundaries, being disrespectful, perhaps stealing things that they shouldn't steal, not following your rules, not agreeing to stay, you have to set the boundaries, or you're doing them no service. So their freedom ends where they start to, step over your safety. And so I would certainly hope that Rob Reiner, Michelle Reiner would have been told that. But I know that it's very difficult to accept having to tell your child no, or to set boundaries when you are a loving parent, especially a loving parent with privilege. Yeah.
And before I go to you, Franz, because I see you itching to get in here, Dr. Frida, boundaries. You keep saying boundaries. What are the boundaries from parents to their son when they want to love him? When you keep saying set boundaries, explain what you mean by that.
If a child is displaying actions that are not safe, if they're saying things, and I don't know if this is the case for Nick Reiner, but just as an example, if it's someone saying, I hate you, or I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill you, or they're, having tantrums and they're ruining things in the home, or they're, not following the rules, or they're checking themselves out of healthcare facilities, or they're, doing drugs and you've told them not to, then the boundary would be, if you're not following this rule, then you cannot be in this home. Now, if you're not following the rule because you're mentally incapable of following the rule, then I will send you to a mental health care facility. But if you refuse to go to the mental health care facility, then you still can't stay here. So the boundaries are set to protect you, to protect your wife, to protect your children, to protect everyone else. The entire family's safety should not be thrown to the wayside just because one person is, exhibiting unsafe or violent behavior.
So then at what point do we actually hold the patient, in this case, Nick, responsible in court?
Ooh.
I mean, and with the point that he understands his actions, and he's, had the premeditation, the thought, the intent, and then does the act. But ultimately, if he's off of his medication, or the medication cocktail causes this cognition to be reduced or diminished, you have another defense that you can use. Because ultimately, if Nick does not appreciate what's happening, or he's chemically imbalanced to the point by the medication that he's unable to understand, those open the door to reasonable doubt, which is all that he's going to need to show that he cannot be held accountable for this. So that raises some very interesting questions. And ultimately, if I get hold of information that he was stable and then they changed his medication, which made him unstable, you can best believe I'm going to use that as a defense.
But Attorney Franz, they said that they changed his medication because he had become erratic, even more erratic. So they needed to change the medication. And then this is when he went into this deep end of schizophrenia. Could Nick have, here's the question, could Nick have known and appreciated the circumstances of his actions and basically took advantage of the fact that he was wrongly medicated? Now, that's a lot of thought, but you don't know what you're getting when people are mentally ill.
So here's what we know, and I'm not Dr. Frida. I'm going to let her talk about this, but here's what we know. Sometimes just because you give me a new medicine doesn't mean it works. It doesn't mean it immediately works. And sometimes it's a game of, and I use that word deliberately, it's a process of getting the right medicine into the person and making it work. Separate and apart from people with mental health issues don't always take their medicines. We know that. So I 100% agree with Gerald. Awesome defense emerges if, wait a minute, you had changed his medicines and maybe that was causing erratic behavior. And maybe that erratic behavior is what leads us to a video that 1 minute we know maybe he was killing his parents and the next minute he's getting a Gatorade. What? So again, it's going to be in the experts. It's going to be, you're going to need a psychotoxipharmacologist or someone that can say, this medicine working with this, and that's separate and apart from, did he have drugs in the system?
Right.
We don't know all these answers. Now, the former prosecutor in me can imagine and can script in my head the parents saying, we've had enough. We're sending you to a facility. I don't want to go to a facility. And all of a sudden, something happens.
And some of these people in the comments, everybody, thank you for watching us here on That Southern Sin is Reasonable Doubt as we break down this case. Some of the comments are saying, hey, Big Pharma is to blame for this because they're the ones making the money off of all of these medications. Everybody keep putting your comments down in chat. Thank you so much for that. So here's another question for the attorneys. What is the bar that Alan Jackson, which is his attorney, has to cross in order to get this move to incompetent? How does that work? Both of you legal minds who, I don't know, tonight you seem to be in agreement a lot. I need to hear something. I need to hear what we're going to hear in January. Let's get to the bottom of this.
Well, the only bar he has to get to is if it's determined that he is in fact competent to stand trial. Then in California, you bear the burden to show that he has insanity. So once you get past the competency, you get past the guilt and innocence phase, then the defense bears the burden because it's presumed that somebody is of sound mind and discretion. But you have to show through medical experts and through psychological experts that that person is incompetent. And so at that point, the burden would shift and the bar would be on his attorney, Alan Jackson. But I think ultimately what his defense attorney has to figure out are two things. One, does your client understand what's happening and can you communicate with them? And then two, what is a defense going to look like and will it be successful and what success looks like?
Attorney France, take the celebrity out of this.
Well,
right?
if he's not a celebrity,
success would be a win, but take the celebrity out of this, which in LA is very hard to do. Right?
So as a defense attorney, obviously we want our clients to go home, but we redefine what winning is. Sometimes winning is you're not spending the rest of your life without parole in jail. Sometimes winning is you're going to be convicted or you're going to be acquitted, but not guilty by reason of insanity. And you're going to spend a great amount of your time in a facility that can control your needs and protect you from yourself and the public. Now, here's the beauty. He gets to use all the defenses. He can use sanity or he can use involuntary impairment based on the medicines. And the law says, knock yourself out. You can use all of these. And all the jury has to do is say, you know what? I want to latch onto this one. Or you know what? You can't prove to me beyond a reasonable doubt that he wasn't involuntarily acting based on that medication. And that is the slam dunk Alan Jackson win there. That's an acquittal. Your client goes home. We're all uncomfortable with that because of what we know, which is we know that this individual has a significant mental health issue and possibly did an incredibly violent crime to two very innocent human beings.
I mean, can we also just keep it real for a little bit? Let's just keep it real because that's what we do here on Southern Sin. If this was Pookie from the hood and he went out there and shot, Daddy Robert and Mama Sheila, would this even be this bit? Would it be this? We need more time for an arraignment. We need to figure out what the evidence is. He would be locked under the jail, and he probably just would have been wearing a hoodie when he got pulled over and arrested.
Well, as the white guy in the room, I'll say this. My clients that don't have a vast sea of resources, he probably would have been living on the street. He probably would have already gotten arrested several times and have a track record. So if we're talking about entitlement, you know, everybody loves Scotty helping out Pookie, but let's call it what it is. Part of the reason we're in this situation is he's Rob Reiner's son, for better or for worse. And part of that double-edged unfairness is the rest of the world either lives on the streets or they have the criminal jacket because they weren't able to dodge as many bullets as he's probably able to dodge.
So if the prosecutor does not overcharge, is he being soft? If he undercharges, like where is the level? Is he going to win either way? If he overcharges, it's going to be too much because this kid is mentally ill. If he undercharges, it's because he's a celebrity's kid. Where's the balance here? And how do you fight for that in court?
I think the balance is, and as many people in the chat have already said this, they're already pulling on the heartstrings, which is what exactly a defense attorney should do in this case. Right. But to go back to Pookie from the corner, Pookie would have had a rap sheet a mile long because he wouldn't have been able to get the proper medication, but for the biggest provider of medication for mental health, the jail. And so Pookie would have a record a mile long. The prosecutor would be seeking death for Pookie because he killed both his parents, and media wouldn't be wall to wall. Oh, woe is me. Pookie had mental health issues and had been in rehab 15 times. Pookie couldn't afford rehab 15 times. So I think that what we have to do in this particular case is not focus on the person, focus on the act and whether or not they had the requisite mental intent to commit the act, and then govern accordingly. The defense attorney in me would love to have this case because I see a whole bunch of holes in this case that are being created. But also, you know, the black activist in me says, man, this is starting to smell. The justice system look like it's doing what it normally does for rich people. And so I think that ultimately, since we're on this, we keeping it real, we know they're not going to overcharge. If they were overcharging, you would already notice them for death. He killed 2 people in cold blood. I mean, chopped them up. So, I mean, let's just keep it real.
And as produced by Keisha just said in the comments, there are people that go their entire lives dealing with mental illness, but they do not go out and kill their parents. Go ahead, Dr. Frida.
Exactly.
Thanks for the comments. Keep them coming. Go ahead, Dr. Frida.
Yeah, and getting back to poor Pookie, we're talking about Pookie, and of course, this takes us right back to the healthcare inequity, because I absolutely agree. Pookie would not have had the proper medical help. Pookie would not have had access to a $70,000 or a $7 a month rehab center. And the other point, we talk about Pookie, how he would have been locked up immediately and charged. Pookie very likely would not have made it. If you have violently murdered your parents, then the chances of you being a black man, can we assume that Pookie is black? The chances of you being a black man and getting out of the hands of the police with your life are very low. And that takes us, and that's what's very frustrating to me. How much of this is privilege? How much of this is paranoid delusions, someone being out of control? And I'll tell you what also frustrates me, because when, you know, I hear you, Attorney Gerald, talking about how, you know, you just can think about all of the things that the defense could come and take on. Here is a fact when it comes to schizophrenia. If indeed it is established that he has schizophrenia, the fact of the matter is that many schizophrenics, if not most schizophrenics, don't believe they have the illness. And so if you don't believe you have the illness and someone is giving you medications, because they say the medications aren't working, we don't know if he was taking them, but if you honestly believe you don't have schizophrenia, you're not taking the medications, then gosh.
Is that possible for him to not know that he was schizophrenic? Ever since he was a teenager being diagnosed in 18 rehab facilities?
Most don't believe that they have the diagnosis, and those paranoid delusions will let them think that everyone is out to get them. You're trying to poison me with these pills. You know, they can have delusions of grandeur. I'm some great, fabulous king, and all of these people are jealous of me, including my parents. including the doctors.
Wow.
This is what happens. And so Lord knows I'm not trying to help the defense in his case, but this is a fact of schizophrenia. Many don't believe that they have the diagnosis, which could lead him to not take the medications. And if they're able to prove that, then I don't know.
I don't know.
And here is the beast. If he is competent, the proceedings move forward. The Supreme Court has said you cannot argue guilt without him being on board. And if you're going to argue not guilty by reason of insanity, you have to argue what? He did the act, but he didn't understand the difference between right and wrong. And if he's clear enough to know what's going on, but not clear enough to know that he has schizophrenia and maybe did the act, if he's looking at Al Jackson saying, you're not going to use that defense, man, oh man, does that make things interesting.
Wow, that is okay. So they've already pushed the arraignment to January 7th. And you're right, at Lori Gomes. Thank you for dropping in the chat. You are right. A lot of these rehabs are like resorts. They're like a spa. So you spend $70,000 basically to walk around and be pampered for 30 days or whatever. And then you come out and you're still not healed. That was a very good point. That's very true. All right. So the arraignment's been pushed to January 7th. Everyone tune in, because at Southern Sin will be live on the ground as this arraignment is happening, because all the questions we're asking tonight, we want to know what happens in the courtroom. So I'm going to go before we close to each and every one of you. Dr. Frida, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the arraignment on the 7th?
My thoughts on the arraignment on the 7th are that while right now in this conversation, we're focusing on Nick Reiner, I don't want to forget Rob Reiner and his wife. This is the same person who was a philanthropist, who directed Ghosts of Mississippi, who was just a good person by all accounts. And so I hate the fact that, you know, all the focus goes to Nick Reiner, and I don't want to forget his parents. But the other thing I want people to be sure of, don't stigmatize people with mental health disorders. Again, there are many schizophrenics. Most of them are not violent, and they are more likely to be assaulted than to be the assaulters. So please, if you have any loved ones who have schizophrenia, don't automatically stigmatize them and be scared of them. What Nick Reiner has done is not the norm. It's the exception.
What do we know about Rick Reiner, guys? What do we really know about him? We know that he was in the one movie that his dad put him in, talking about mental illness, which ironically, right? So that they could have some type of bond. But what do we know about this 30-something-year-old guy? Do we know anything? I think we have a video. Let's cue the video to learn more about Nick Reiner.
I wanted to talk about his famous family and what it was like growing up there. It was a tricky meeting. He turned up late. I remember he didn't smell really very, very good at all. In fact, he smelled terrible. He looked really disheveled. He looked like he had just woken up, and he was annoyed. He got angry with the staff when they got his order wrong, and so it wasn't a very pleasant meeting. Everybody knew. If I knew that Nick was troubled, I live in New York. All the insiders, everybody that I speak to in Hollywood knew Nick. He was around. His dad dragged him everywhere with him. He dragged him to the Conan O'Brien party just the night before. I was told from two people at that party, when Nick turned up, there was a groan. There was like, he's here again. This was not a teenage boy. He was 32 years old, and to be dragged to parties that he was not invited to. His mom and dad were invited, he wasn't. And so there was a real sense that he was troubled, he was difficult, he wasn't very pleasant to be around. But I think this goes to show you the power of his parents. People tolerated Nick because of his dad. People put up with Nick because of his family.
Does that give any of you much insight into Nick is? And will that video be played in court?
I don't see that video being played in court, and I'll go one step further. I'm also now thinking actors are going to act, and that creates another element of this of what Nick are we going to see on stage? Are we going to see the one that has a genuine mental health issue, or are we going to see a performance? And if I'm a prosecutor, you better believe in voir dire and in my opening, I'm going to point out the fact so that everybody knows this guy is a 32-year-old grown-ass man who is an actor.
So Gerald, it sounds like this guy was a nuisance. Like people didn't really, according to Rob, of course, full disclosure is just according to one guy, Rob, who was a celebrity publicist in Hollywood. According to him, when people saw Nick showing up, they were like, oh gosh, this guy again. Kind of like, is he maybe assuming, is he going to be drunk? Is he going to be high? Is he going to be a problem?
I think that Alan Jackson has two of the best secret weapons, because that's a celebrity publicist, but obviously his brother and sister are paying the legal bill. So you could put them up as character witnesses. And so what I don't want to be lost in this whole thing. And, you know, I was a Rob Reiner fan, The Princess Bride, Few Good Men, American President, of course, Ghost of Mississippi. If I'm the prosecutor, I make sure that the victims are remembered in this entire trial, because there's not too many people more famous than Rob Reiner. And so if we're going to pull on the heartstrings, we're going to talk about people being an actor, bring in the producer who created the actor, and make sure you put on a show that holds this person accountable. So I think that it's going to be a hell of a production, whatever this trial ends up being, because you're going to see Hollywood on trial. And obviously we got to make sure that the voice of the victims are centered.
Attorney Grants. Yeah. I mean, you know what? Remember Charlie Sheen? I enjoyed watching that one. We have grace for Charlie Sheen and Robert Downey Jr.
Oh,
what do you mean? No, I didn't even finish the question.
no, I'm saying,
what do you mean? No?
I'm saying they are so not Pookie, you know, these names you're mentioning.
None of these names are Pookie, because Pookie does not make it this far. We all know that. So grace was given to all of these others, right? Are we assuming grace is going to be given again to Nick Reiner? You're shaking your head, France. Why?
Well, first of all, Robert Downey Jr. and Charlie Sheen didn't murder their parents with a knife, which, by the way, let's not mince words. Killing somebody with a knife, up close, personal, the most brutal homicides you're ever going to experience. We're not talking about shooting somebody at a distance. We're talking about multiple stab wounds. When Robert Downey Jr. starts killing loved ones, then I'll cross that bridge. But grace on that level, no. Now, we might give him grace. We might give him grace if we have a couple of experts that really can dig into, this guy didn't understand what he was doing and couldn't understand the distinction between right and wrong. But I love grace. It's amazing. I'm not ready to dole it out yet.
Okay, so I asked Dr. Frida what she thought about the January 7th arraignment. Gerald, let me get your take. Will this go to trial? Yes or no? You can do more than yes or no. Will this go to trial?
No, I don't think it's going to go to trial. I think that ultimately he will be found incompetent to stand trial. If he showed up at an arraignment in a blue straight jacket with no clothes on, he couldn't even get through the arraignment. That shows you mentally where he is and how difficult it's been for his attorney to work with him. So I think ultimately this doesn't go to trial.
What? He didn't show up naked in a straight jacket when he walked into the store. How does Alan Jackson get him into that same outfit and mindset to walk into court? Because if you can walk into the store and buy some chips and a Coca-Cola, you can show up for court. No, France?
So if you're Alan Jackson, when he shows up to court, you want him looking the part. You want him looking the part of a disturbed young individual, even though he's 32. You want him looking disheveled. You want him looking like you can't. This is not a situation where you put lipstick on a pig. This is a situation where he has to lean into the mental health if that's the route you're going. Now, it's totally different if you're like, it wasn't him. He didn't do it. That's a totally different defense. But look, at the end of the day, you got to get to a point where we can clearly know that he understands what's going on in the court proceedings.
So if he then, in fact, is incompetent, does he get committed for life? Does he just go to another rehab facility for life? Does he get an ankle monitor? Because I don't know how these happen in the hood. So what happens in Hollywood? How does it work?
You have to go through the process of restoration. And so They will send him to a hospital to see if he can be restored. And ultimately, the state's doctors will determine whether or not he can be restored. If he cannot be restored, then there's a process by which he could be returned to the community for stabilization and to live in a way that's not completely in a hospital. But it depends on the level of restoration or if they can get him restored. There are individuals who have been found to be incompetent who have stayed in hospitals, for years. So ultimately, it's a process. But I think that given the way he looked at the arraignment, the information that we were receiving secondhand about his mental history, I think that's the road he's going to end up.
France, January 7th, really quick. Yes, no, go to trial. What happens?
I think it gets delayed, or we see a competency motion in advance of that, which will cause a delay. I don't see it going to trial, and I don't see it going to trial because I think at the end of the day, if he is on board, I think that there'll be a resolution, whether it's a plea or whether or not it's a stipulation of not guilty by reason of insanity, only because I think the family is going to be, as much as they're devastated, I think it's the same family who's mourning who's going to want some kind of resolution for him.
I mean, no one's asking me, but I think it's going to be delayed. I think when the 7th comes, it's going to be a dud. I don't think there's going to be much happening on the 7th. It's just, to your point, going to be pushed and pushed and pushed. That's only a couple of weeks from now. It takes apparently 30 days in rehab to get straight. So he needs a little bit more time, I think. Everyone was amazing. To all of you out there watching and dropping in the comments, we appreciate you. Make sure you you become a member for more exclusives at Southern Sin. Tonight, we did a little different. We dived in. We didn't tell you what to think. We showed you what to question, and that's why it's the Reasonable Doubt Show. Because justice doesn't just live in the verdicts. It lives in the actual courtroom, and it lives behind the details. And all of the details are with the experts that you see on the screen. Attorney Gerald Griggs, Attorney France, Dr. Frida. Thank you for joining us. If you all out there want more of the stories that the jury hears and for us to talk about it in real talk, like I said, this isn't court TV, make sure that you follow us right here on YouTube. We stream live trials every morning and drop new true crime episodes every Wednesday at 9 o'clock. Thank you for sticking with us through the technical difficulties, but we got it done. This is what we do. Here's just a few facts about the case. Verified in the Rob Reiner murder case as of now. Here's what happened. Legendary director Rob Reiner, 78, and his wife, Michelle, were found stabbed to death in their Brentwood home in Los Angeles on December 14th. What we know is that on January 7th, there will be an arraignment for their son who committed the murders in cold blood, stabbing them to death. Make sure you stick with us because we will be live that day in LA from that arraignment. I'm your host, Dara Kennedy. Make sure that you subscribe to @Southern Sin. Have a great night, everybody.
True crime just got darker. Catch the full episode on the link above. Subscribe to @Southern Sin today and hit the notification bell for more live original episodes Wednesdays at 8 p.m.